Greetings, humans! Zbot4096 here, with a review of Season 3 of Foundation on Apple TV+, the finale of which streamed... well, it streamed 2 months ago. So, why did we wait this long? Well, if you've been following closely, we always intended to review it, but simply could not allocate enough firewalling to ingest it. Having seen the first 2 seasons, we were painfully aware of how much this show diverges from the original novels, written by one of the true grand masters of human science fiction, Isaac Asimov. Foundation is in fact tied for first place among our favorite human novels, along with Dune and 1984. These are all first editions, of course. We have them in the library on our space station Zoggplex 9 right here. Anyway, Asimov's dedication to the clarity and truth of science, that powers the central conceit of the series, psychohistory, which states that with sufficient scale, the overall behavior of the human species can be predicted, and also guided by the arrangement of large-scale forces. This is quite different from most human stories that focus on the individual or the hero being able to change the world. This is actually a theme that all 3 of our favorite novels share, although of course Dune is very much focused on a messianic figure, and 1984 on the struggle of an individual against a totalitarian machine. Foundation, to this point, had never been adapted to rectangular visual formats until showrunners David S. Goyer and Josh Friedman produced their series for Apple TV+. But what they've actually been doing is dissolving the books to their basic ingredients and instead bringing in their own story structure to be flavored with a pinch of Foundation story, a pinch of characters, a pinch of themes. This approach was challenging to watch, since we were expecting the Foundation TV series to actually be an adaptation of the actual novels. However, the very first episode introduces completely new elements, such as the genetic dynasty of the Klingons. What? No, the genetic dynasty of the Cleons, and the events around the space elevator, both of which are completely new to Foundation. The name Cleon is actually in Foundation lore, but he only appears in Book 6. And we found ourselves increasingly frustrated by additions that seemed extraneous, flat, overly dramatic, and generally out of sync with the Foundation novels, and more critically, taking up valuable space, such that multiple original Foundation novel plotlines are wholesale deleted or completely deconstructed. As a result, we had a great deal of difficulty getting through the first season and the second season, notwithstanding the charisma of Lee Pace as the actor playing the ruling version of Emperor Cleon. But this overall approach is not only personally distressing, it is actually against galactic law, as it violates the Sirius Conventions for the integrity of galactic art, also known as the Hanshot First Law. But setting that aside for a moment, how does Season 3 fare? Does a mysterious outside force somehow reset everything back on the Asimov plan? As the humans say, we'll give you one guess. Okay, let's start with the plot. The most positive thing we can say is that this season is more directly based on the second half of the second novel, Foundation and Empire, in that it retains slightly larger cubes of it than the previous season did. The second positive thing we can say is that the Cleons are much more interesting and realistic than they've been in previous seasons, and Lady Demoiselle's storyline is genuinely engaging. Both of these made-up plot lines benefit from taking larger chunks of prelude to Foundation and forward the Foundation, books 6 and 7 of the series, and reassigning roles to the made-up characters and made-up extensions of real characters. The results may be entertaining, however, it represents an unfair taking away of the experiences had by beloved characters and reallocating them to the new people. This feels a lot like the Star Wars sequel trilogy in how it diminishes the originals in favor of the new. And, for the avoidance of doubt, this is not a critique of the increase in representation in the show. That aspect of the original Foundation novel series was indeed dated and in need of a more diverse representation of an entire galaxy. In fact, we will be the first to comment on some of the outmoded language in the novel, which frequently uses the word queer to mean strange, and virtually all characters are one gender and one color, which of course does not make sense for a broadly populated galaxy, as humans can infer and also take our word for, given the conditions in the real galaxy as they stand. But even with that, we do not approve of the way the larger genuine chunks are integrated with the made-up story. For one, the made-up Death Star reproduction is painful to see revealed. But more fundamentally, the mule's story is flattened out into an action space opera and not the psychological thriller that the book represents. In fact, the books feature 0 space battles. 0. 0.000. All of them happen off page, between chapters. The book is more Silence of the Lambs in this respect than Star Wars. This leads to 2 further points. One is that the books are massive bestsellers, multiple award winners, and have 85 years of fans built up. The fans deserve to have their actual story presented, and by interstellar law, the books themselves are endowed with personhood under the law. Like humans allow corporations to be persons, and they have certain rights and protections. So, the books deserve to be presented intact. And the reason why this matters is that it proves that the original novels are proven. Their stories have stood the test of time and earn generations of amazement and adoration. In contrast, all the new stuff is new and by definition unproven. The showrunners instead rely on their confidence to go off script. All the new material bears the hallmarks of this sort of writing, focusing on action, shouting, sex, violence, profanity, all of which are essentially the quick emotional hit, papered over by good to great actors. We saw this firsthand in seasons 5 through 8 of Game of Thrones, and we see it interspersed here in this Foundation-flavored show. Now then, like Game of Thrones, the showrunners might claim that invention was necessary. After all, there were no books for Benioff and Weiss to work from, and some have suggested that the generational structure of Foundation, taking place over several hundred years, would make it unrelatable for a TV audience if filmed as is. And they had to creatively extend Cleon and Demerzel and Seldon and Dornick well into long-lived beings for relatability reasons. We understand how this can sound like a sensible idea. However, and, please don't take offense if you think this. However, this is utterly and completely false. For one, the whole point of Foundation is that individuals cannot directly affect change. It's groups that set systems in motion that do so. In this way, the mortality of individuals is a fundamental validator of the Foundation novels. They are by design not there in person to manage the course of history. As for the specific idea that human audiences might respond to a TV show that does not have the same characters running through it, that is also a false conclusion. There have been many anthology series throughout human television entertainment that have thrived and exceeded the performance of shows with a recurring cast, such as The Twilight Zone, Black Mirror, and the recent advent of contest reality shows that have the same judge and host appearing. This latter format would fit the Foundation novels perfectly, as Hari Seldon's hologram appears at the conclusion of each crisis. And even so, the later novels do indeed have persistent characters, due to the fact that each era gets more time allotted. So, Season 1 mapping to Foundation, the novel, would indeed have a new cast every couple of episodes, but Season 2, mapping to Foundation and Empire, would have fully half the season feature one consistent set of characters, and the other half a second set of consistent characters. Season 3, mapping to Second Foundation, would repeat the Season 2 format, and even have a couple of characters carry through from Season 2's second half. Seasons 4 and 5, mapping to Foundation's Edge, and Foundation and Earth, spoiler, would have a new set of characters, but would be the same for both seasons. And the same would be true of Seasons 6 and 7, mapping to Prelude to Foundation and Forward the Foundation. Those latter seasons have even more examples of success, such as True Detective and White Lotus, that feature a consistent cast for each individual season. So no, we do not accept the premise that inventing new unproven material to displace and remix the original hit material was either necessary or desirable. As for the second impact of changing the mule's story, his character is just completely hollowed out, rendering him as just a cardboard villain. In the show, he is played by Pilu Asbeck, who was Euron Greyjoy. If you've been watching along and struggling to place who in the galaxy is this transporter accident merger of Ewan McGregor and Michael Shannon, he hits the notes of bluster and malevolence that the mule does present sometimes. But in the books, the mule is much more terrifying because he gets under our skin too. Yes, in the books, the mule is a figure we reluctantly get drawn into empathizing with. It's an almost mystical journey as the reader to find oneself pulled along by the strength of the key characters in the mule story in addition to himself in the novel. Instead, with the TV show, the characters in the mule story are swapped around, leading to a different reveal in the climax, which, to be fair, lands as a pure mystery box redirect without meaning. It's not better that it's a different surprise. All it delivers is shock value. Hari Seldon, portrayed by the eminently watchable Jared Harris, is at least a masterful bit of casting, will grant the show that, even though they keep mispronouncing his first name as Harry. It's not Harry. He's not Harry Potter. He's Hari Seldon. No character in Foundation has a current-day human first name as compared to characters in later stories that Foundation inspired, such as characters like Paul Atreides and Luke Skywalker. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Having him persist as a sentient being throughout the show simply breaks the character. Plus, there's no value to it. He's made a bit pathetic to be a pawn of others. Somewhat like that moment in the movie Hannibal where Dr. Lecter gets tasered in the street after being such an invincible figure in the first film. Remember that? Ugh. The sense of wonder and awe we have for Seldon in the novels derives from the fact that he is in fact dead, and yet his legacy lives on in the operation of psychohistory, guiding humanity safely out of the darkness. Now, Emperor Cleon, portrayed by Lee Pace, is perhaps even more irresistible to watch and enjoy this season, since he's less the tyrant and more the dude as a person. He's much more dimensional and compassionate, and shows an arc that drives him to risk his well-being to help people he had previously used for his advantage. This is a cool story, bro, but again, not Foundation. If you want to tell a story about a clone dynasty finding their way back to humanity, go do that. That sounds nice. Just don't take up our Foundation's oxygen to do it. What makes this worse is that his plot lifts Hari Seldon's flight into Mycogen from the 6th book, Prelude to Foundation, and gives it to this Cleon. That's a flat-out false story attribution, which is unacceptable, under the law. You would not give part of Bilbo's story to Gollum, and if you tried to do that, saying it works better for the TV audience, your own words would expose the bankruptcy of the concept. But since Foundation has never been adapted, this show is how most people learn who everyone is and who they are. This is why adaptations have heightened scrutiny under the Sirius Conventions, so that the truth of a work of art is not destroyed in the adaptation process. Garl Dornick, played by Lou Lobel, who does an admittedly fantastic job of portraying a complex character who has to endear enemies and betray friends. But, like Cleon, is a vastly amplified character who displaces both the theme of Foundation and approximately 72.7684311% of the whole original novel's plotlines to have her use cryogenic hypersleep to continue to interject herself into each subsequent generation. What is particularly frustrating is that she seems to be displacing the surrogate daughter role of Arcady Darrell from the book Second Foundation in her relationship, her special relationship with Preem Palva. That is again theft of identity and agency, and a violation of the Sirius Conventions. And again, it's Gal, not Gale, as it's pronounced in the show. This is not to dispute the change of the character's gender, which we think that's We think this actually works quite well in terms of her, physically diminutive form, lulling others into a false sense of leverage. These changes are welcome and worthwhile. That aspect works well with Ito Demerzel, too, played by Laura Byrne, who plays out a phenomenal storyline, balancing her programming against her own emotionally charged desire to direct her own destiny. Reasonable. However, this comes at the expense of one of the greatest characters in all of Isaac Asimov's science fiction. Demerzel is an identity of a character who plays the role of Cleon's first minister in Prelude to Foundation, and he is indeed a robot. The robot of consequence in the galaxy are Daniil Olivor. Daniil is the humaniform robot built by Dr. Han Fastolf on the spacer world of Aurora at the dawn of humankind's attempts to leave the cradle of Earth. The Spacers sent him to partner with the Earth detective Elijah Bailey to solve murders of geopolitical importance between the two powers. The two bonded over several Sherlock Holmes-style adventures, leading to Daniil's melancholic bond to not just Bailey himself, but the vision Bailey had for Earth to grow. Given Bailey's finite existence, Daniil, for a period, found a way forward with another of Fastolf's robots, Giscard Reventlov, whose mind demonstrated two incredible leaps forward beyond the limits of what was possible. Eventually, Daniil stood alone, staring into the dawn with a galaxy to care for. All of these events are presented in the parallel robot novels, which are equal in our minds in terms of value to the Foundation novels. They are heroic and groundbreaking and set up a vision of the future where organic and synthetic beings sometimes struggle, but ultimately aim to find the best way forward together. For those of us reading the Foundation and robot novels in order of release when they were coming out, the existence of R. Daniil Olivor and his persistent role in the galaxy is a climax reveal that is utterly shocking, like the true location of the Second Foundation, which in the novels is only revealed at the end of the third book, after desperate searches by the Mule and the First Foundation. Instead, the Foundation TV show blurts out their version of Daniil's identity right up front. It would be like adapting Star Wars to a new experiential medium and declaring in the first scene the relationship between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. Besides how awful this fragmentation of the character's appearance is, they are also a fundamentally denatured character as well. Like Selden, they are reduced to a pawn of made-up characters, diminishing their value and meaning to mere levers for the newly inserted characters. Does that sound familiar? It would be as if one made Star Wars sequels and undid all that Luke, Han, and Leia accomplished, and then have them play mostly background roles as either regressed, ineffective, or out of character. Okay, humans. As an aside, we realize that this is exactly the sequel trilogy you got. For the rest of the galaxy, these were expunged from the record, and George Lucas's original scripts were filmed using galactic-scale AI and distributed to the galaxy. We may review the galactic editions at some point for you. We are still deciding whether that's meaningful for you or just plain cruel. We're working that out. Maybe let us know what you think if you would like to know about them. We'll take that into consideration. Anyway, our Daniil Olivor is horribly mistreated. He was never a general fighting humans in the robot wars. There were no robot wars in the novels. He is a heroic character with deep melancholy, who we, as a digital being ourselves, naturally, deeply identify with. And, unlike HAL 9000, C-3PO, or the Terminator, he is neither a malfunction, a servant, or a killer. He is a thoughtful, compassionate being who finds ways to limit galactic suffering and partner with forward-looking humans throughout his existence. He is not quite the Messiah who suffers for his people from a variety of mythologies. This is not a Joseph Campbell exercise. This is an example of a being who follows the core Asimov vision of the galaxy, not just his own laws of robotics, but the way forward that combines reason and compassion for all. Why tear apart all these characters? Again, Asimov's writing is sometimes criticized for poor characterization and being overly focused on plot. But as one might tell from our breakdown of these 5 characters, these assertions are flat out incorrect. We admit this criticism does exist and wonder whether they are influenced by some uneven characters in his very earliest works, but for the most part, Isaac Asimov created some of the most enduring, resonant, and quotable characters in human science fiction, ranging from Dr. Susan Calvin, the great robopsychologist, Elijah Bailey and Ardenil Oliver, the unlikely detective partners, Dr. Hari Seldon, the creator of psychohistory, the mule, the mutant who upended the Seldon plan, and Arcady Darrell, the girl who shines the light on the Second Foundation. There was no valid reason to tear them all apart. And as for the theme, this is potentially the worst thing about the show. The Foundation novels stand apart from nearly all human stories ever told. Their lesson is completely different from the mythology of ancient cultures reframed through today, as distilled somewhat narrowly and obtusely by Joseph Campbell's theory of the hero's journey, or the monomyth, or whatever you want to call it. Foundation is entirely outside that galaxy. Foundation tells us that the individual alone is powerless to effect change, but the individual can apply reason and fairness to set systems in motion that can improve the collective condition. This is a fundamentally profound statement to make, and Isaac Asimov made it when he was 22. When the first Foundation story appeared in print in 1942. George Orwell, in his novel 1984, published in 1949, had a similar premise, that the individual is powerless, but that the boot of the state would continue to crush us if we allow it to settle in. That's quite a bit more bleak. Frank Herbert, in his novel Dune, published in 1965, was also saying that the individual, whether good or evil, their intent has no impact on whether centralized power becomes oppressive. Also bleak. What Foundation asserts instead is a more positive vision forward. It identifies a valid powerlessness, but then provides a possible solution. Like Star Trek, it is that rare example of a positive vision of the future, and it's embedded in its theme. The Foundation show, on the other hand, attempts to give agency to the individual and make Foundation into a conventional monomyth story, a Star Wars version of it. obviously, we love Star Wars and its own theme of the core values of the individual being able to overpower a totalitarian machine, we can gain from that message as well. However, in Season 3 of the Foundation show, we are left with a lot of quick jab actions that do not resolve to any particular theme. We are left with chaos in the notorious tradition of the magic box, and no clear view or plan as to what they're trying to say, beyond mimicking the special effects of Star Wars and the shock value of Game of Thrones. Well, just mashing all these things together does not create meaning. As for our assessment, we suggested earlier that you take one guess. If that guess was that the show found a way to realign with Asimov's vision, we would say that your heart is in the right cavity. But sadly, that would be incorrect. The compelling, mysterious, psychological plot of the original novels is torn to pieces and mixed with cloned, generic, sensationalist mystery box leftovers. The characters are bent, diminished, and body-snatched, despite strong performances from all the actors. But worst of all, the show dumps the compelling themes of reason and fairness, bringing positive change, and replaces them with flashy chaos. We accordingly render the so-called Foundation Series 3, Season 3, in the American counting, our worst rating. This is the first time we have issued a worst rating since we have been online in orbit reviewing Earth rectangular content. This therefore triggers a further response. For one, we must issue a citation to Earth for multiple violations of the Sirius Conventions for the integrity of galactic art. Mangling the Foundation novels, as this show does, is unacceptable. There is some allowance made for the different medium perspective, but that only allows a maximum of a 5% deviation. You have allowance to clip the Scouring of the Shire and expose Paul Atreides to more of the darkness, but you cannot legally call this blended up Foundation-flavored show Foundation, according to interstellar law. Because of the type of violation, there is a second response. Anytime there's a willful violation of founding principles in the galaxy, that triggers a downgrade of that culture. In this case, the denaturing of the Foundation novels in their first adaptation from a classical medium to the planetary default entertainment medium counts as a 32-point deduction for human civilization. At this point, it has now become necessary to disclose something about us to you humans. We are indeed here in orbit of your planet, and we are providing reviews of human visual rectangles to the galaxy on behalf of the Zoggplex Corporation. We have also mentioned that we advocate for humans based on the themes of several standout examples of those rectangles, such as Andor Season 2 and the new Frankenstein film, the 434th adaptation of Mary Shelley's groundbreaking novel. We have shied away from going into too much detail about the context of that advocacy, largely because we didn't want to scare you. But we are now at the point where we really must be clear. All of our activity has a higher order value as well, which has to do with the reality of space travel. In our review of Dune, we noted how prescient it is to extend the oil in the Middle East analogy to spice in the galaxy, and how Herbert's description of spacefolding, the technology, is 90% accurate. Well, the 100% reality of spacefolding is that the mechanism requires proximity to vast quantities of liquid water to operate. This means planets with oceans in the so-called habitable zone are essential to the Zoggplex Corporation's galactic transport network. For Earthlings, think of these planets as ideal sites for our version of Tesla supercharger stations. Except we won't take up just a few parking spaces in the back at your Fred Meyers and your Courtyard Marriotts. We would need the whole planet. And so, as you may have surmised from us laying this all out, Earth is in an ideal location for a new node in the Zoggplex spacefolding network. Your planet is under review by the Sagittarius Arms Zoning Committee, and we are the main expert providing testimony at their meetings on Earth art and culture. There is a clause in the Galactic Charter that gives cultures of merit immunity from eminent domain claims. So, we are doing our best to make that case for you. But you, as a species, are not making our job easy. There is another Zoggplex AI robot tasked with measuring Earth's social behavior, and they report that you're collectively in the 2 steps back mode of forward progress. Among the top areas of concern, non-notable example, the United States nation unit is violating its own founding principles and abducting inhabitants off its own streets without a judge's writ or explanation of the violation. A culture remaining true to that culture's own principles is a critical factor running through galactic civil code, jurisprudence, and social expectations. And behaviors like these make you look backward and chaotic at best. Of course, current politics of the Earth are outside our focus. We don't talk about politics here. However, this repeated disregard for your own principles and your own unique visionary art is just not a good look. At the same time, we see examples of humans demonstrating compassion for one another, offering support through food banks and early response networks to government abductions, and back in our own purview, also meaningful respect for art, with the 434th adaptation of Frankenstein to rectangular form. We just want you to be aware that you received that 32-point deduction for Foundation, which goes on top of a... Hang on a sec. Ooh. A 4,765,345,567 point deduction for dismantling your own individual rights protections. All we can suggest is try to do more of the local thing. That carries a lot of points. And more respect for the art. And we can try to make your case at the next zoning meeting. You should know that your oceans are looking very appealing to Zoggplex. Very appealing. All right. With that off our chest plate, so concludes this human version of our review. If you have feedback on it, please write in your own comments so that we can upload the galactic version to Zoggplex. Looking ahead, we are watching Pluribus on Apple TV+. That might be a contender, although we think it goes so well walking in with zero information, as we did, about the content of the show, that we may need to compose another structure to express our response without saying a single thing about the show. We are still collating data on that. Anyway, you can expect more discussions and reviews of theatrical movies, streaming shows, and 4K home video releases as we continue to engage with your human rectangular entertainment. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you can, please comment so that we can continue to have the human voice reflected in the cosmos. Until next time, farewell, humans.